The sound cracked through the courtroom like thunder. A judge's gavel struck wood, but it wasn't the echo that held the room. It was the object lying on the table between them. A diamond ring. Nestled inside a velvet red box, the stone caught the light from the high windows and shattered it into fragments. White sparks danced across the ceiling like ghosts. Every eye in the room turned toward it, as though justice itself had been frozen inside that glittering rock. Then came the words, low, harsh, and cutting. Jonathan Reed, 32, shoulders squared, jaw clenched, spoke as if every syllable weighed a lifetime. That ring was a promise, not a trophy. You broke the promise. Give it back. His voice didn't tremble, but his pulse did, hammering so loud in his ears that for a moment he thought the whole room could hear it. He kept his hands pressed flat against the wooden table, knuckles whitening, as if holding himself together through sheer will. Across from him, Emily Carter, 29, tilted her chin upward. Her eyes sparkled as brightly as the diamond, but with something colder defiance. She let the silence hang just long enough to feel like victory before releasing her counterstrike. A gift is a gift. You don't take back love once it's given. The word slid out with practiced elegance, a dagger wrapped in silk. The spectators in the back row shifted, murmuring, some nodding almost instinctively. To them, it sounded simple, even logical. A gift was permanent. Everyone knew that, didn't they? The tension coiled tighter. Jonathan's heartbeat rattled against his ribs. He could still hear the echo of another sound, sharper, crueler. The sound from weeks earlier when Emily had hurled the ring down onto a glass coffee table. The diamond had struck, left a thin spiderweb crack across the surface, then wobbled, shimmering, refusing to settle. That sound had replayed in his head ever since. Crack, 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 crack. The fracture lines in his life. Now, sitting under the fluorescent glare of justice, the memory returned uninvited. He wasn't just fighting for a piece of jewelry. He was fighting against that sound, the echo of humiliation. Emily smiled faintly. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of certainty. She believed the law was on her side, that tradition and precedent would paint her as the victim and Jonathan as the bitter ex. Her attorney had likely rehearsed it with her. Calm, poised, unwavering. All she had to do was hold her ground, and the diamond would remain hers. Jonathan saw it, the quiet arrogance, the unshakable confidence that she could wound him twice, once in love and once in law. The judge, a woman with silver-framed glasses, and the weary patience of someone who had presided over too many broken promises, cleared her throat. Papers shuffled, shoes scuffed against polished stone. Somewhere in the back, a clerk tapped a pen, the sharp rhythm cutting through the thick air. Jonathan inhaled slowly. He thought of the whispers that had followed him since the breakup. Pathetic, petty, suing for a ring. Friends who once shook his hand now avoided his gaze. Drop! Even his mother's voice still haunted him. Let it go, John. You look small. But how could he let it go? It wasn't about carrots or cost. It was about truth, about promises, about not being mocked for demanding back what the law he believed said was his. He stared at the diamond. To anyone else, it was just a luxury, a status symbol. To him, it was a contract forged in stone. He could almost hear the words from the night he'd placed it on her finger. This is forever. Forever had lasted 6 months. The courtroom waited. Tension ticked like a metronome. Emily adjusted the cuff of her blouse, deliberately slow, letting the diamond catch the light again. Her lawyer leaned close, whispered something. She didn't blink. She didn't falter. She simply exhaled and spoke loud enough for the room to hear. He wants revenge, not justice. He can't stand losing me, so he wants to take back the only thing he thinks proves I was his. That's not law, that's obsession. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Someone coughed. Another shook their head. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He forced himself not to snap back. Not yet. His attorney touched his elbow, a subtle reminder. Wait your turn. The law will give you a voice. But inside, Jonathan's mind was already racing. He knew the statutes. He'd studied them late into sleepless nights, flipping through casebooks, reading footnotes until dawn blurred the words. He could recite them now, like scripture. He wasn't just a man scorned. He was armed with the law itself. Still, the sting of Emily's words lingered. Revenge. Obsession. Was that how everyone saw him? A jilted lover clutching at scraps of pride? He felt the weight of their eyes pressing into him, branding him with labels he didn't deserve. Emily sat straighter, her expression serene, almost regal. To her, this was theater, and she was winning the audience. But Jonathan wasn't acting. He was bleeding in real time, and the only bandage he had left was the truth. The judge finally leaned forward, fingers steepled, her gaze swinging between them. Mr. Reed, Miss Carter, she said, her tone crisp. This court will not indulge in sentimentality. What matters here is the law, not heartbreak, not pride, not pride. The law. The word law cracked sharper than the gavel had. Jonathan swallowed. His heart slowed. For the first time since entering the room, a strange calm washed over him. He had been humiliated, yes, but humiliation had given him clarity. He wasn't here to relive heartbreak. He was here to define it. He glanced at Emily, saw that faint smirk still lingering at the corners of her lips. She believed she had already won, and maybe that was the moment Jonathan knew this battle was far from over. The diamond sat between them, silent, merciless, sparkling like an executioner's blade. The court clerk rose, voice steady and formal. "Miss Carter, you may present your account." Emily Carter adjusted the lapel of her blazer and stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Every eye tracked her. For a moment she let the silence hold, like a violinist pausing before the bow touched the string. Then she began. Her voice was calm, measured, and just loud enough to fill the chamber. "I did not break a promise," she said. "He did." A murmur rippled through the benches. Jonathan's chest tightened, but he forced himself to remain still. Emily continued, steady as a metronome. "Jonathan stopped being the man I agreed to marry. He grew cold, distant, controlling. The love was gone long before I made any decision." She clasped her hands as though in prayer. "If a ring is supposed to symbolize love, then the moment he stopped loving me, it ceased to be a condition. It became mine." There it was, mine. The word landed like a hammer against steel. Clear, ringing, final. She repeated it, deliberately. It was mine the moment he placed it on my finger. To fall. Mine. The sound echoed in Jonathan's head like a drumbeat. Each repetition stabbed sharper than the last. Emily turned slightly, angling her body toward the gallery of spectators. He wanted possession, not partnership. He wanted to own me, not love me. Not love me. And when he realized he couldn't control me, he wanted to claw back the one thing he thought still gave him power. She paused, eyes flicking to the ring box. But it was mine. Her lawyer, a tall man with a perfectly knotted tie and a grin sharp as glass, seized the moment. He rose, buttoning his suit jacket with theatrical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, the law in this state is clear," he said, voice rolling like thunder across the room. "An engagement ring is considered an unconditional gift. It does not matter if the wedding occurred. It does not matter who ended it. Once given, it belongs to the recipient. That is not spite. That is not sentiment. That is law." The words struck like a script rehearsed 100 times. He tapped his fingers against the podium in rhythm, each point punctuated like a verdict. "My client is not greedy. She is not vindictive. She is simply holding on to what is hers." He leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimate, almost conspiratorial. "What he seeks is revenge, not justice." A revenge? The words spread through the courtroom like smoke. A cough here, a whisper there. Jonathan caught the glances, people shifting uncomfortably, lips curling in faint judgment. He felt the weight of strangers branding him. Emily stood calm, hands folded neatly. She radiated composure. To the untrained eye, she looked like truth incarnate. Jonathan's attorney shifted in his seat, scribbling notes furiously, but Jonathan's focus had tunneled. His jaw clenched until it ached. He bit down on the inside of his cheek hard enough to taste iron. His fists tightened, nails digging into palms, but he didn't speak. "Not yet." The judge raised a brow. "Ms. Carter, you claim the decision to end the engagement was not yours?" Emily tilted her head, feigning thoughtfulness. "No, Your Honor. He withdrew long before I said a word. He stopped calling me by the names he once did. He ignored my concerns. He treated the ring as leverage, as proof of ownership, not of love." She glanced sideways at Jonathan, letting her eyes rest on him for just a second longer than necessary. A faint, satisfied smile crept at the corner of her lips. "He ended it with his silence, not I. All I did was acknowledge the truth." Jonathan wanted to slam his fist into the table, to scream that she was lying, but he forced himself still. The lies stacked higher, and still he waited. The lawyer for Emily pressed the attack. "Your Honor, this is not just a matter of sentiment. It is about precedent. Case law in this state has consistently treated engagement rings as absolute gifts. They do not hinge on ceremonies or church bells or broken vows. They hinge on one fact: delivery. Once delivered, it is hers. It was hers. It remains hers." He stabbed the air with a finger toward the velvet box. "That diamond belongs to Emily Carter. Not today, not yesterday. From the moment it was given, it was hers. Mine, as she herself said." The echo returned. "Mine, mine, mine, mine." Jonathan shut his eyes for half a breath. Each repetition was like a nail hammered into his chest. The gallery reacted predictably. A woman in the second row leaned toward her neighbor, whispering, "She's right. A gift is a gift." A man behind them nodded, lips pursed. The weight of opinion tilted, invisible but suffocating. Even the court reporter, normally expressionless, flicked her eyes upward at Emily's words, as though caught in the spell of her certainty. Jonathan, cornered, let his gaze wander. He noticed the young clerk by the judge's bench, no older than 23. The clerk's pen spun nervously between fingers. He wasn't nodding. He wasn't smirking. He was thinking. Doubt was written on his brow, a flicker of possibility. Emily kept speaking, every sentence with a blade. He accuses me of betrayal, but the truth is simple. He betrayed the love first. He treated the ring as collateral for control. I will not be punished for refusing to live in chains. Her lawyer slammed the point home. The plaintiff is a man scorned, clinging to the remnants of pride. The law does not cater to heartbreak. The law recognizes gifts. And this ring, he gestured dramatically to the diamond, is hers. Entirely, unconditionally, irrevocably. Mine, the final word echoed. Jonathan's teeth ground together. His body screamed for release, but his mind whispered restraint. His attorney's hand brushed his arm again, steadying, reminding, not yet, hold. The judge sighed, glasses sliding down her nose. Thank you, Ms. Carter. Thank you, counsel. The court will hear from the plaintiff shortly. The gavel tapped once, not final, but firm. Emily turned, walking back to her seat with the confidence of a victor. Her heels clicked sharp against the tile, each strike like punctuation to her triumph. She sat, exhaled slowly, and for the briefest second, her eyes met Jonathan's. They gleamed with quiet arrogance, with certainty. Mine, her look said. Always mine. Jonathan stared back, unblinking. His lips did not move, but inside, a storm gathered. He was bleeding dignity by the second, every word she spoke carving him thinner. Yet beneath the ache, something stronger coiled. Resolve. Because Jonathan Reed was not done, and Emily Carter, for all her confidence, had no idea what storm was waiting in the silence. The judge adjusted her glasses and gave the briefest nod. Mr. Reed, the floor is yours. Jonathan stood. Slowly. Not with the jerking movements of anger, but with a composure that startled even himself. His chair slid back against the polished floor with a faint scrape, echoing louder than it should have. He placed both hands on the table, then straightened to his full height. The courtroom seemed to shrink around him. Emily's lips twitched in something between amusement and disdain. This was the moment she had prepared for, the spectacle of a scorned man sputtering his bitterness into the void. She leaned back slightly, bracing herself for his inevitable outburst, but it never came. Jonathan's voice, when it arrived, was calm, level, almost surgical. Q. Your Honor, under state law, an engagement ring is a conditional gift conditional upon marriage. When the condition fails, the law requires the return of the ring. The words landed like stone. The gallery stirred. Several heads turned, exchanging quick glances. Conditional gift? The phrase was unfamiliar to some, unsettling in its weight. The clerk at the judge's side froze mid-spin of his pen and began to scribble notes furiously. Jonathan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Each word was clipped, deliberate, sharpened. He reached into his brief, pulled out a sheet, and held it up. This is Bennett v. Davis, decided by this state's appellate court. In that case, the engagement ring was deemed a conditional gift. The condition? Marriage. Marriage, no gift. The court ordered the ring returned. Not because of sentiment, not because of morality, but because the law recognizes conditions attached to certain gifts. He lowered the paper, eyes steady on the judge. This is not novel. This is precedent. The word hummed like electricity through the room. Precedent. Jonathan glanced briefly at Emily. For the first time, her posture shifted. Not much, but enough. Her spine, once perfectly straight, leaned ever so slightly forward. Her eyes flickered, just once, as if calculating. Jonathan pressed on, his tone unwavering. Your Honor, the law does not punish heartbreak. It does not reward betrayal. It punishes deceit. It protects promises. He let the silence breathe, then sliced it apart with 3 short bursts. A promise, a condition, a ring. The rhythm cracked through the chamber like a gavel. Each word was a blow, measured and exact. Emily's lawyer adjusted his tie, clearing his throat, but said nothing. For the first time, interruption seemed unwise. Jonathan's gaze drifted momentarily toward the gallery. He saw the whispers, the raised brows. The spell Emily had cast earlier, mine, 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 was fraying. Doubt crept in, and doubt was contagious. He returned to the bench, voice softening, intimate. Years ago, I taught a class on property law. My students asked me about broken engagements, about rings, and I told them this. The law doesn't punish heartbreak. It only punishes deceit. A gift given with no strings is one thing, but a gift given as part of a contract, spoken or unspoken, is something else entirely. That ring was not a trinket. It was the symbol of a contract. The contract was not fulfilled. The condition was broken. And when a condition breaks, the gift returns. For a moment, silence reigned. Even the fluorescent hum overhead seemed to dim. The young clerk paused in his furious scribbling. His eyes shone, not with pity, but with recognition, with understanding. Jonathan inhaled. His hands trembled faintly, but not with fear, with conviction. He laid them flat on the table once more, steadying himself. Emily says the ring was hers the moment I placed it on her finger, he said. His tone tightened, precise. But if that were true, the law would not have spent decades defining conditional gifts. The law is clear. The law has spoken. And the law says otherwise. Emily shifted again, this time blinking faster than before. She kept her chin high, but the faint crack in her armor was visible now to anyone looking closely. Jonathan didn't stop. She claims I grew cold, that I withdrew, that I ended it in silence. But love, or the lack of it, is not what this court measures. Courts cannot weigh affection. They weigh facts. They weigh law. And the fact here is this. The wedding did not happen. The condition failed. The ring must return. His attorney leaned back, satisfied. Jonathan hadn't just spoken, he'd carved the air with his words. Emily's lawyer finally rose, but even his interruption sounded weaker. Your Honor, opposing counsel misstates the nature of conditional gifts. Many courts. The judge raised a hand, silencing him. He is citing precedent. Let him finish. Jonathan bowed his head slightly in thanks, then continued. Your Honor, I am not here to relitigate our relationship. I am not here to cry over heartbreak. I am here because the law matters. If promises can be broken without consequence, then trust in the law erodes. If conditions can be ignored, then contracts collapse. This ring is not a bauble. It is a legal symbol of a conditional promise, and the law demands it return. He stopped, just long enough for the silence to weigh. Then, once more, the cadence, a promise, a condition, a ring. The gallery stirred again. A man in the back row muttered, He's right. The woman beside him frowned, torn. The spell had shifted. The tide had turned. Emily sat motionless, her lawyer whispering furiously into her ear, but her face betrayed the faintest flush creeping up her neck. Her certainty was cracking. Jonathan looked directly at the judge now, his eyes steady as stone. Your Honor, I once believed silence could preserve dignity, but silence feeds lies, and lies, if unchallenged, corrode justice. Today I break that silence, not to relive heartbreak, not to reclaim pride, but to uphold the law. The judge tapped her pen thoughtfully, her expression unreadable, but the room knew something had changed. The narrative had shifted. Jonathan sat slowly, his heart thundering, but his expression calm. Calm! Across from him, Emily tightened her grip on the edge of the table, her knuckles pale. The young clerk, forgotten by most, wrote one final line in the margin of his notes, words he'd remember long after the case was over. A promise, a condition, a ring. The courtroom air had changed, though no one had yet admitted it. Jonathan's calm dismantling of Emily's narrative had pulled the rug from under her, but most believed it was temporary, a momentary ripple in what was still her tide to command. Then Jonathan reached for his leather briefcase. The sound was subtle, the brass latches snapping open, yet it drew every ear, like the hiss of a fuse being lit. He did not rush. He pulled the case closer, slid a hand inside, and withdrew a thick, weathered binder. Its corners were frayed, the cover mottled with ink stains. Across its spine, faintly embossed, were the words, Property Law, Cases, and Commentary. The gallery leaned forward. Some squinted, others frowned. Jonathan laid it flat on the table. His fingers brushed over the edges as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. Then, with deliberate care, he opened it. Slow motion, the cover peeled back, releasing the faint scent of old paper and ink. The pages fanned out, margins drenched in handwritten notes, lines underlined in red, comments scribbled in tight script, arrows linking precedent to precedent. The overhead lights caught the red ink, glinting like veins of fire across the pale paper. Gasps whispered through the room. Emily's head tilted, disbelief dawning. What is that? Jonathan's eyes lifted, steady, calm. A casebook. He tapped the first page, where his own name was inscribed in neat block letters. Jonathan Reed, Adjunct Professor, State University Law School. Emily's breath caught audibly. You, the word faltered before hardening into accusation. You're using the law against me? Jonathan's reply was measured, surgical. Not against you, for the truth. The silence that followed was total. Even the fluorescent hum above seemed to vanish. Emily's lawyer froze mid-scribble, his pen hovering uselessly above the legal pad. The clerk's mouth parted slightly, eyes flicking between Jonathan and the open casebook. The judge herself shifted in her seat, the first true sign of surprise since the trial began. Jonathan slid the binder forward, toward the edge of the table. I taught this, he said softly, but his voice carried. For years, I stood in front of students explaining the difference between unconditional gifts and conditional ones, between sentiment and statute, between love and law. He flipped a page. The sound of paper against paper seemed amplified, like the rustle of thunderclouds gathering. This is not opinion. This is not emotion. This is doctrine, written, cited, tested. He pointed to a line underlined in scarlet. Marriage is the condition. Without marriage, the ring must be returned. Emily's composure cracked. Her lips trembled as she forced out words. You never told me you. Jonathan's gaze met hers, unflinching. I didn't need to. My identity doesn't change the law. But today, it matters. Because you stood here and painted me as a man blinded by heartbreak. A man chasing revenge. He placed a hand firmly on the binder. I am not blind. I am not chasing. I am standing exactly where I have always stood on the law. The symbolism could not have been sharper. Emily's bare finger, once adorned with a diamond, rested on the table, twitching slightly. Across from her, Jonathan's hand pressed down on the annotated casebook, one hand empty, stripped of symbol, the other heavy with authority, ink, and precedent. The contrast glared. Possession versus principle. Trophy versus truth. The young clerk's pen clattered from his hand. He didn't even stoop to pick it up. His eyes were fixed on Jonathan as though watching the ground tilt beneath his feet. Jonathan turned a few more pages. Each one bore the scarlet notes of someone who lived and breathed this material. Here, he said, reading aloud. Hyman v. Parrish, Kansas, 1997. The court held that an engagement ring is a conditional gift, revocable if the marriage does not occur. The reasoning, public policy does not support unjust enrichment through broken promises. He looked up, eyes sharp. Unjust enrichment. That is what this is. Keeping the ring is not justice. It is profit from betrayal. The word struck with surgical precision. Profit from betrayal. Emily swallowed hard. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his tie. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, voice lower but firmer. You called it yours. Mine, over and over again. But the law does not bend to repetition. The law bends to reason. He tapped the red ink with his finger. And reason says, the ring must return. For a moment, the courtroom seemed suspended in amber. Emily's breathing quickened. Her shoulders stiffened, as though holding up the weight of every eye upon her. The certainty that had gleamed earlier in her smile had dimmed, leaving only the brittle edge of denial. Jonathan closed the binder halfway, resting his palm on its cover. I did not come here as a man scorned. I came here as a teacher of the law, asking that the same principles I taught be applied to me. Not because I am bitter, but because consistency is justice. Slow motion again. He pressed the binder flat. The light struck the glossy edge of the casebook, bounced off, and glimmered against the empty velvet ring box. For a split second, the law itself seemed to cast its glow onto the symbol of the broken promise. The gallery gasped. Emily whispered hoarsely, her voice audible despite her effort to contain it. You turned this into a classroom. Jonathan shook his head. No, I turned it into a courtroom, where the truth belongs. The judge leaned back slowly, her expression unreadable, but the glint behind her glasses betrayed interest. The spectators shifted in their seats, sensing the axis of power had pivoted. Emily stared at her bare finger again, as though willing the diamond back into place. But the finger was naked, and across from her, Jonathan's hand rested firm on law itself. The image was complete, one side stripped, one side fortified, the balance reversed. And for the first time since the trial began, Emily Carter's silence said more than her words ever could. The silence that followed Jonathan's reveal lingered, heavy and electric. His casebook lay open, red ink burning like fresh wounds across its pages. But even precedent, even doctrine, wasn't the final blow. It was merely the foundation. Jonathan straightened, hands clasped behind his back. His eyes moved to the judge. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to submit documentary evidence. The judge nodded once. Curt. Proceed. Jonathan's attorney rose, carrying a sleek black folder. With practiced precision, he approached the bailiff, who then passed it to the bench. The judge glanced briefly, then motioned toward the large projection screen mounted at the side of the chamber. A technician flicked a switch. The screen hummed to life, white light filling the space. Jonathan's voice didn't waver. Your Honor, Exhibit A. The screen flickered, and then words appeared. Words that detonated like dynamite in the quiet hall. I'm calling off the wedding, but at least I keep the diamond. The sentence glared across the screen in massive black letters, the glow reflecting in every eye. The gallery gasped. Some people leaned forward, mouths open. Others whispered, sharp and incredulous. The sound of shock rolled through the chamber like thunder. Emily froze, her eyes widened, lips parting soundlessly. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair until her knuckles went white. Jonathan's voice cut through, even and merciless. This is a text message sent by Miss Carter to her close friend, dated 3 days before she informed me of the broken engagement. The metadata verifies the origin. It has not been altered. He let the silence soak. The message glared on screen, undeniable. Emily finally found her voice, brittle and frantic. Those were private words, not meant for court. Jonathan turned to her, his eyes like steel. His response came low, sharp, and final. Shh. Truth doesn't stay private when it destroys justice. The gallery erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even a faint cheer quickly silenced by the gavel. The judge banged once. Order. But the damage was already done. The message hung there, luminous and damning. Jonathan stepped closer, his voice rising just slightly. Your Honor, this single sentence reveals intent. It was never about heartbreak. It was about possession, not of love, but of property. She ended the engagement, and in her own words, she sought to profit from the remains. Emily's lawyer scrambled to recover. Objection. One message does not prove. Overruled, the judge snapped. Her tone cut clean. Jonathan nodded, then raised a hand. Exhibit B. The screen shifted. A scanned receipt appeared, crisp and undeniable. Diamond engagement ring, 2, 1 carats. Condition of sale. Engagement gift, conditional upon marriage. The words were highlighted in neon yellow. The terms leapt off the page. The murmurs rose again. A woman in the gallery shook her head, whispering, "It's right there." Written. The judge leaned forward, squinting through her glasses. Then she nodded. Once. Twice. Jonathan pressed forward, his cadence tightening, each phrase a hammer. The purchase record. The legal condition. The explicit contract. Not sentiment, not speculation. Fact. Emily's shoulders quivered. She shook her head violently, stammering, That doesn't mean anything. It's paperwork. Just paperwork." Jonathan's jaw clenched. He let the silence drag just long enough before delivering a blade. "You didn't keep love. You didn't keep love. You tried to keep the profit of betrayal." The words rang out like a bell struck in iron. The gallery erupted in a roar, some gasping, some clapping, some simply exhaling the breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. The clerk at the bench fumbled his pen again, stunned. Even the judge's lips tightened, as though suppressing a reaction. Emily's lawyer leapt up, voice cracking with desperation. "This is character assassination. These so-called exhibits are evidence." Jonathan's attorney cut in, sharp as glass. The judge's gavel came down. "Order." Jonathan moved to the screen again. "If I may, Your Honor, let us examine these words carefully." He pointed to the message still blazing across the projection. "At least I keep the diamond." This was not grief speaking. This was calculation. This was intent. She saw value in betrayal and chose profit over promise. He clicked again. The invoice returned, glowing yellow. And here, explicit language of condition. Engagement, marriage. Without fulfillment, return. The law recognizes it. Commerce recognizes it. Only Ms. Carter denies it. Emily slammed her palms against the table, her voice shrill now. "You can't do this. Those were private. You're humiliating me." Jonathan turned slowly. His reply was not shouted. It was cold, crystalline, final. Humiliation comes not from the truth. It comes from the lie. The words cark into the silence. The young clerk, eyes wide, scribbled that line in the margin of his notes. He knew he would never forget it. Jonathan faced the judge again, his breathing steady, his voice ironclad. "Your Honor, what we see here is not merely a failed engagement. It is an attempt to manipulate the law into rewarding deceit. But the law does not exist to comfort liars. It exists to protect promises, and a promise broken cannot yield profit." The judge steepled her fingers, eyes piercing Emily. For the first time, the weight of judgment shifted visibly against her. Jonathan let the silence expand, then struck once more, his voice dropping to a low, resonant rhythm. "Pol, por, and por si. One receipt, one truth." The gallery held its breath. Chaos, a promise broken, a condition unmet, a ring returned. The cadence hit like drum beats. Emily sagged back into her chair, trembling. Her lips moved soundlessly, repeating words no one could hear. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, but she jerked away. Jonathan returned to his table, closing his binder slowly. His movements were deliberate, each one a declaration of control. The judge leaned back in her chair, expression grave. "The evidence is duly noted." The room exhaled. But Jonathan's words still hung in the air, sharp and unforgettable. "You didn't keep love. You tried to keep the profit of betrayal, Kate." And in that moment, everyone in the chamber knew. The case had shifted. The lie had been pierced. The diamond no longer sparkled with Emily's victory. It now reflected only her downfall. The judge scribbled a final note and looked up. "Mr. Reed, is there anything further?" Jonathan gave a small nod to his attorney. His lawyer rose smoothly, a new stack of papers in hand. "Yes, Your Honor. We ask the court's permission to introduce broader evidence regarding the systemic nature of these disputes." The judge arched a brow. "Proceed." The lights dimmed slightly as the projection screen came alive again. This time, it wasn't a message or a receipt, it was a slide. Big, bold letters filled the room. 65% of engagement ring disputes end in litigation. Gasps trickled through the gallery. The number loomed, stark and cold. The lawyer clicked again. Another slide appeared. Sex. In 80% of cases, state law rules the ring, a conditional gift. The figures glowed like neon, undeniable and impersonal. Yet they spoke volumes. The courtroom murmured, strangers whispering, tallying up friends, cousins, co-workers who'd fought over rings. Jonathan stepped forward, voice steady but carrying weight now beyond personal grievance. This is not just about us. It's about how the law protects promises and how lies try to profit from broken ones. His words landed differently this time. No longer as a man defending his dignity, but as a citizen speaking a truth that touched the community. The lawyer advanced another slide. Headlines splashed across the screen. Ex-fiancé sued after refusing to return ring. Courts battle. Rising engagement ring disputes. Conditional gift laws sparked debate across states. Each headline underscored the scale of the issue. Jonathan took a breath, then told a story. His voice slowed, softened. 2 years ago, in another state, a woman was left humiliated. Her fiancé ended their engagement, and when she refused to return the ring, she was branded a thief. On social media, they called her a gold digger. She lost friends, she lost her job, but when her case finally reached court, the law ruled the ring conditional. She returned it. She said later the hardest part wasn't losing the diamond. It was surviving the public shaming, the chorus calling her greedy for holding on to something she thought was hers. The courtroom fell silent. Even Emily looked down, the weight of the story sinking in. Jonathan's tone sharpened. This is what happens when the law is misunderstood. People suffer twice, once in heartbreak and once in humiliation. And when liars twist the law, they don't just steal property. They steal dignity. His attorney gestured to the slide once more. The bold letters remained. 65% Bach lawsuits. Now all suits. 80% Bachlan. Conditional gift. The numbers glowed like scars etched into the wall. Jonathan pointed toward them. Every number you see is a person, a life, a promise broken, a courtroom filled. These aren't statistics. They are stories. And every story carries the same truth. The law does not reward deception. The judge's gaze narrowed, but not in disapproval. It was focus-absorbing, weighing. Jonathan pressed forward, each phrase building momentum. The ring is not a weapon. The ring is not a trophy. The ring is not leverage. It is a promise. And when that promise dies, so does the claim to the ring. The gallery stirred. A young woman in the back row wiped her eyes. The clerk scribbled furiously again, trying to capture every line. Jonathan's voice dipped lower, intimate now, drawing them in. You see, Your Honor, when Emily said mine, she was not wrong in spirit. Love should feel like ours. But the law doesn't measure spirit. It measures conditions, and conditions protect all of us. Without them, contracts collapse, promises mean nothing, and trust erodes. He turned slightly, looking not just at the judge, but at the spectators, the unseen audience beyond. If we let lies stand, then every broken engagement becomes an opportunity for profit. Every promise becomes currency. And marriage itself, what should be sacred, becomes just another transaction. The lawyer clicked again. A final slide appeared, bold and brutal. This is not a personal flaw. This is a design. The words burned across the screen. Jonathan let them hang in the air, then repeated them slowly, like chiseling into stone. This is not a personal flaw. This is a design. The phrase cracked the chamber open. A ripple of shock ran through the audience. The idea was bigger than a fight over one diamond. It was systemic, a pattern, a structure that rewarded manipulation. Jonathan stepped back, allowing the words to breathe, then added softly, "We cannot allow the design to stand. We cannot let deceit become tradition." Emily shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her earlier poise unraveling. She looked small now, framed by numbers, precedent, and stories bigger than her own. Jonathan's attorney closed the argument with crisp finality. Your Honor, the broader picture makes clear. This court is not only deciding one ring, one promise. It is affirming the principle that law protects conditions, not lies. That precedent shields promises, not profiteers, and that justice does not bend to arrogance, but to truth. The judge tapped her pen slowly, her face unreadable, but the silence in the room told the story. The tide had shifted beyond repair. Jonathan's last words before sitting sank deep into the marrow of every ear that heard them. The law doesn't punish heartbreak. It punishes deceit. And today it must punish the lie. The gallery sat in hushed awe. The slide still glowed, numbers staring down like judgment etched in light. And in that glow, Jonathan Rhee was no longer just a plaintiff fighting for a ring. He was a voice for every broken promise turned into a battlefield. The courtroom was still. The slides had dimmed, the evidence packed away, but their echo lingered in the heavy air. Every face in the gallery was turned forward, eyes fixed on the bench. The judge adjusted her glasses, lifted a sheaf of papers, and cleared her throat. The sound was like the crack of ice on a frozen river. After careful review of the arguments, the exhibits, and the precedents presented, she began, her tone measured. This court must apply the law as it stands, not as we wish it, not as sentiment may demand, but as the law requires. Jonathan sat rigid, hands folded, heart pounding. Emily gripped her lawyer's sleeve, her breath coming fast and shallow. The judge continued. The central question is whether the engagement ring constitutes an unconditional gift, as the defense has claimed, or a conditional gift, as the plaintiff asserts. The court acknowledges precedent, both within this state and across others, holding that such rings are given in contemplation of marriage. They are conditional upon the fulfillment of that marriage. She paused. Silence swept the chamber like a tide. Jonathan's breath caught. His throat was dry, but his eyes never wavered. The judge's voice grew sharper, a scalpel cutting away doubt. This court finds that the engagement ring in question was a conditional gift, and because the marriage did not occur, and because the engagement was terminated by Miss Carter. She looked directly at Emily now, her gaze piercing. The condition has failed. Therefore, the gift is revocable. The ring must be returned. The words fell like a verdict from the heavens. Emily stiffened. Her mouth opened, then shut again. Her eyes glossed, filling with tears that clung stubbornly to her lashes but refused to fall. Her chest rose and fell with a tremor she couldn't conceal. She said nothing, not a plea, not a protest. Nothing. Jonathan bowed his head. Relief surged through him like a tide breaking through a dam. His lips moved in a whisper, audible only to the clerk sitting closest. Cass, love may break, but promises don't bend to lies. The line hung in the quiet like incense, faint but unforgettable. The clerk's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered against the desk. He didn't reach for it. His eyes shimmered, his breath held. For him, it wasn't just a trial. It was witnessing the anatomy of justice. The judge raised her gavel. Return the ring. Case closed. Thick. The strike cracked through the chamber like a bell tolling in a cathedral. One. Final. Sound. The catharsis was total. The audience exhaled as if they had been holding breath for hours. Some closed their eyes. Some leaned forward in disbelief. The moment was pure release. Emily slumped back, the last embers of defiance extinguished. She stared at her bare finger, now feeling emptier than ever. The ring that had once seemed hers had dissolved in a single ruling. What remained was silence and shame. Jonathan didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He sat quietly, hands clasped, absorbing the weight of vindication without triumph. For him, this wasn't victory. It was restoration. Reporters in the back row were already scribbling furiously, phones buzzing. They knew the headline had written itself. Outside, under the press lights, Jonathan stepped up to the microphones. His attorney lingered behind him, silent. The crowd pressed closer, cameras flashing. Jonathan lifted his head. His voice was steady, his cadence deliberate. The ring is not a trophy. The ring is not a weapon. The ring is a promise. The words rolled like waves, each one striking harder. He paused, letting them settle. Cameras clicked. Microphones trembled forward. Pair. And today, this court affirmed that a promise broken cannot become a profit. It must return to its truth. The anaphora reverberated across the crowd. Reporters scribbled, their pens racing to capture each phrase. One journalist mouthed the words silently, already imagining the headline. Jonathan stepped back from the podium, but the echo lingered. The ring is not a trophy. The ring is not a weapon. The ring is a promise. The young clerk emerged from the courthouse a few minutes later, notebook clutched in his hand. On the last page, in bold letters, he had written the same words. He knew they would stay with him long after this case was forgotten by most. Inside, Emily sat alone in the courtroom, shoulders trembling, her lawyer whispering futile consolations. She had no words left. The ring was gone. The law had spoken. The truth had been reclaimed, and somewhere, deep in the silence after the gavel, justice exhaled. The courthouse emptied slowly, the echo of the gavel still ringing in the minds of everyone who had heard it. Outside, reporters rushed to file stories. Lenses caught Jonathan's steady stride, and microphones chased after the anaphora that was already morphing into tomorrow's headline. But the verdict didn't just close a case. It opened a ripple that traveled far beyond the stone walls of that courtroom. Emily Carter left the courthouse through a side door, escorted by her attorney. The diamond no longer sparkled on her hand. Cameras still caught her face, pale, rigid, eyes red from tears that never fully fell. By nightfall, her name trended online, not as a sympathetic figure, not as a bride to be wronged, but as the central cautionary tale. The screenshots of her text, "At least I keep the diamond," flashed across social media. Commentators dissected it line by line, late-night hosts turned it into punchlines, and law bloggers coined the phrase, "the diamond case," to shorthand it. In bars, in classrooms, in offices, people argued, was she greedy or simply mistaken about the law? But the public consensus hardened quickly. Emily Carter had tried to profit from betrayal, and the law had caught her hand in the act. Friends she once confided in stopped answering calls. Colleagues distanced themselves. Her name became a footnote in Cassie books. Reed v. Carter, year, C. A cautionary star for generations of law students to underline. The diamond was gone. Her dignity, too. Jonathan Reed, by contrast, did not strut in victory. He returned to his lecture hall weeks later, casebook in hand. The classroom filled early, students buzzing with anticipation. Some had watched the trial live stream. Others had clipped the highlights off TikTok. All of them waited to hear from the professor who had lived his own syllabus. Jonathan began his lecture the same way he had years before, by writing 3 words on the board. Promise, condition, ring. The room fell silent. He turned, chalk dust on his fingertips, and said, "The law doesn't punish heartbreak. It punishes deceit. Remember that. It may sound abstract now, but one day, it might not be." Suck. The students scribbled as if etching scripture. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan's classes filled beyond capacity. Students perched on windowsills, stood in the back, even sat cross-legged on the floor. Not because he was famous, but because he had shown what few professors ever could, that the law was not just ink on paper. It was lived, tested, fought for. He had not only reclaimed a ring, he had reclaimed the principle he taught. Law schools across the state updated their syllabi. In property law classes, Reed v. Carter joined Hyman v. Parrish and Bennett v. ESA. Davis is a modern precedent. Professors debated its phrasing, dissected the exhibits, argued whether Jonathan's courtroom cadence would influence future interpretations. Some schools even screened clips of his testimony. Students watched him whisper, "Love may break, but promises don't bend to lies," and sat stunned. They weren't watching a case. They were watching a transformation of heartbreak into doctrine. Bar associations cited the ruling in continuing education seminars. Family lawyers warned clients with renewed clarity, "The ring isn't yours until the vows are." And then there was the woman in the neighboring state. Her name was Rachel Torres. She had been abandoned a month before her wedding, left with nothing but a dress and a silence that cut deeper than any words. Her fiancé demanded she return the ring, and she resisted, not out of greed, but because it was the only thing she had left. Friends mocked her. Strangers online called her gold digger when the story leaked. But when she read about Reed v. Carter, something shifted. She saw Jonathan's words quoted. "Truth doesn't stay private when it destroys justice." She replayed his anaphora. The ring is not a trophy. The ring is not a weapon. The ring is a promise. Rachel found a lawyer. She filed suit. And months later, she won. She sent Jonathan a letter, handwritten and trembling. "Your case gave me the courage to stand. Thank you for proving that the law still sees us." Jonathan kept the letter folded inside his casebook, between pages scrawled with red ink. Meanwhile, the world moved at the speed of a swipe. A first-year law student named Marcus clipped the courtroom footage of Jonathan pointing at the projection screen where Emily's text blazed. "At least I keep the diamond. Sequel Cass." Marcus added his own caption in bold white letters, "Law isn't about romance. It's about conditions." He uploaded it to TikTok. and TikTok. Within 48 hours, the clip hit 5 million views. Comments poured in, "This guy's a legend." Each furred, not a bitter ex, just a man with receipts. "Professors like this make me want to study law." The clip went viral across platforms, stitched with reaction videos, debated in podcasts, parodied in memes. Yet beneath the humor, the truth spread. People learned what a conditional gift was. People argued less in ignorance and more in knowledge. Jonathan never sought the viral fame, but he couldn't deny its reach. In classrooms, in kitchens, in courtrooms, people repeated the phrase, "Law isn't about romance, it's about conditions." The months later, the courthouse where the trial had unfolded unveiled a new plaque. Bronze, heavy, mounted at the entrance. It bore a simple title, "The Hall of Promises." The beneath, in smaller letters, etched for permanence, "No gift survives a broken condition. Fuck." Visitors paused to read it. Some smiled, some frowned, but all understood. This was not just decoration, it was doctrine immortalized. On the day the plaque was mounted, Jonathan visited quietly, alone. He stood before the bronze, his reflection warped in its sheen. He traced the engraved words with his eyes, feeling both pride and weariness. He knew what he had won. He also knew what he had lost. Love was gone. The diamond, though legally his again, no longer symbolized joy. It sat in a safe, cold and silent, a relic of promises unkept. Yet standing there, he realized the true inheritance was not the stone. It was the principle, cast now in metal, etched into precedent, taught in classrooms, shared across millions of screens. He whispered, almost to himself, "Justice isn't a ring. It's the courage to protect a promise." And so the aftermath stretched far beyond one man and one woman. Emily Carter's name became a caution. Jonathan Reed's became a lesson. The legal system gained a precedent, and society gained a phrase to argue over at dinner tables, in classrooms, in courts. The gavel had fallen once, but its echo had only begun. The courthouse steps gleamed under the crush of camera lights. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, lenses flashing like lightning across a storm. The verdict had been read, the gavel had fallen, but the story was only just beginning. Jonathan Reed emerged into the chaos. His suit was rumpled from hours in court, but his posture was iron straight. The velvet box sat in his pocket, heavier than any stone should feel. The questions hurled at him were deafening. How do you feel? Was it worth it? Was it worth it? What will you do with the ring? He raised a hand, not to silence, but to steady. The noise ebbed. The world leaned in. His voice was calm, deliberate. Silence only feeds injustice. Lies kill faster than fists. Share this story so no promise ever turns into someone's profit. The words cut through the air, slicing cleaner than any headline. The microphones trembled closer. Jonathan's gaze shifted, locking not on the reporters, not even on the crowd, but directly into the nearest camera lens. Breaking the wall, speaking not to the press, but to every living room, every phone screen, every silent witness watching from afar. If you're watching this, maybe you've paid into a promise broken. Hear me, contracts matter. Promises matter. Share this story. The flashbulbs burst, but the silence around his words made them brighter than light. Emily's shadow still lingered in the crowd, reporters hoping to catch her reaction. But Jonathan's voice pulled the focus back to the principle, away from spectacle. He exhaled once, then delivered the line he had carried in his chest since the first day of trial. Chest, actions have consequences. And today, consequence caught up with lies. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some gasping, all capturing the line for replay, for captions, for history. But Jonathan wasn't done. He leaned closer to the lens, eyes steady, breaking the last barrier. His voice dropped to something softer, more intimate, the kind of tone that made even strangers feel called by name. If you're watching this, maybe someone kept what was never theirs. Hear me, the law sees you. Share this story. The pause after was deafening. The words seemed to echo across the plaza, carried not by speakers but by silence itself. Reporters scrambled, typing furiously, already crafting headlines. The law sees you. Consequence caught up with lies. A ring returned, a principle restored. Jonathan stepped back. His attorney touched his shoulder, ready to escort him away. But Jonathan's eyes lingered on the crowd, as if searching for someone who had been invisible too long. Then he gave the final strike, the line destined for replay, stitched into 1,000 clips, etched into memory. Actions have consequences. And today, consequence wore a diamond back to justice. The cameras erupted again, flash after flash, but Jonathan turned and walked down the steps. Not triumphant, not boastful, steady, certain. The microphones chased him, but the message was already complete. It wasn't about the ring anymore. It wasn't about Emily. It was about every promise broken, every person silenced, every truth buried under shame. The clips spread within hours. On TikTok, his words stitched with quiet piano music. On YouTube, highlighted with captions in bold white text. On Twitter, replayed as a rallying cry. The law sees you. Share this story. And people did. Thousands, then millions. For those betrayed, it was vindication. For those silent, it was a voice. For the system, it was a reminder. Jonathan Reed had returned the ring not to his pocket but to its rightful place in the court of truth. And the world, for once, was listening.